I'm James, and this is Producing Fun, a podcast about making games from a product perspective. Welcome to Producing Fun. This week I talked to Chris Eggett. Chris is the editor of Tabletop Gaming Magazine, the UK's largest board game, RPG and miniatures game magazine, and he also runs the publication's own podcast. Being at the helm of this title gives him a unique perspective on how the industry works. His job sifting through a vast swathe of game-related news, developments, and new releases gives him a broad view about what's really going on that's very different from a designer or publisher. And that's why I thought he'd make an excellent guest for episode 2. I wasn't wrong. But in the end, we didn't talk about the current game scene that much. Instead, we spent more time discussing more important and fundamental topics. As I suspected, Chris had a huge amount to say about how we should talk about games, which is critical if we're going to get a better understanding of how to craft these boxed experiences. But he's also very honest about what limits us from talking about them in the same way as other creative disciplines. Indeed, honesty is what I really enjoyed about this conversation. We got to steer into some slightly dangerous ground by having an open and upfront chat about more controversial topics that I hadn't really prepared for, like the hobby's off and on obsession with objective reviews, or the more contentious issue of Kickstarter previews. I'm talking here both about their cold commercial value as advertising and their murky ethical questions, both issues that rarely get the nuanced treatment I think they need. That said, while I think we do a better job than many of having a very transparent conversation about this, I wasn't completely satisfied. It's something that would repay a more detailed exploration in the future, supported by more hard data. There's a lot I enjoyed in this conversation. Most illuminating for me was the revelation of how different my definition of product is from many in the industry. But Chris provides valuable insights into a range of topics: how and why his analog magazine thrives in a digital world, great advice for publishers looking to get the attention of media, and a taster of what's to come at the magazine's upcoming virtual spring showcase. Anyway, it's time to get on with the interview. We join just as Chris is explaining why strong opinions about games matter so much.
Or even if you don't enjoy opinions, you know them well enough to know, like a friend, like a friend's recommendation, that Chris doesn't like this aspect of roll and writes. So next time he says this is rubbish because of this, I can ignore that bit and I can look at the other bits he said and said, actually, that sounds great for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Well, I mean, if we think about the wider review world, going way outside of board games, we get to, for example, restaurant reviews.
Sure.
Still, the name of the most famous person I can think of in restaurant reviews in Britain is A.A. Gill.
Yeah.
And opinionated does not even begin to capture like that. So I think that's really interesting that in other spaces, there's this more explicit grasping of we really want to read people who have strong opinions.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know what you think about that in terms of what we get in board games, where you still get these occasional discussions about objective reviewing.
And which is nonsense.
Well, it is, right? Straight up, it's nonsense. Because an objective review can only be a description of the components at best, right? And that's if you assume we have some sort of philosophical worldview where there's a possible to have some sort of guaranteed truth, then at least we can say these are the components in this box. So there's no way that that anything about how well the game plays could possibly be objective. But why do you think it is that the game space still has a strong interest in that?
Well, in strong opinions or in the description star review?
Well, it seems very obvious that what a magazine would have to tend towards, in my mind, thinking about this from a kind of evolution of market perspective, is towards being pretty opinionated, because that's the way that all of these other more mature areas are like. We've had restaurant reviews. I would assume the first restaurant reviews newspapers, I don't know how old they are, but I could imagine they could go back to the 19th century, whereas no one was writing a magazine about tabletop games, as I understand it, even 30 years ago, let alone, right? And actually, when was the magazine founded?
It was some 5 years ago, I think.
Right, so very, very recent.
Comparatively, yeah.
So what is it that means that we haven't rapidly evolved towards the status where everyone's like, of course, reviews are really opinionated and they're all about opinion?
I think that is the central problem in game reviews, which is that we are still looking at something that is ultimately a product.
Right. Okay.
So obviously, having a lovely meal, you're not reviewing the freshness of the fish. I mean, you are in some ways, but you're not reviewing the components of the meal. You're reviewing the experience in some way, and the same way with film. You know, you can say objectively this is a beautiful scene, or subjectively, but we can all broadly agree this is a beautiful film.
Well, film has technical elements where we can say that
Yeah.
things are, and again, I wouldn't say they're objective exactly, but they're slightly closer to some sort of standardized notion of technical competence in certain spheres.
Exactly. Yeah.
Film,
Yeah.
like
it's in focus. You know.
There you go. That is a pretty basic one, right? And
Yeah,
that actually
yeah.
certain degrees of shot composition change less radically over time in terms of what is good or not versus other elements. So
Exactly.
that makes sense.
So what you're really looking for there is the experience you're going to have.
Yeah.
And that's something that we all actually know is what games are about.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sitting down and doing a review, because we are in such a kind of like consumerist market, and just in the sense of it's about, often for people, it's about buying and owning a thing as much as it is playing the games in some respects, because we have things like Kickstarter which give us these really long lead times to actually playing it, and we just want to talk about it anyway, so this is the only thing we can do. And then when you finally get it, you want to say, here's the stuff. And I guess that's where it comes from. I think it's just because we are in a world of wanting, not even wanting, but we're kind of trapped with the idea that these are products we're buying and not experiences necessarily. Yeah, which I, as I said before we started this, I think this is maybe the central failure of all games writing at this point, which is we're while magazines like our own, we're always attempting to give you opinions. We don't do reviews which are descriptions of the game. We tell you how it makes you feel. We tell you how to play it a little bit, just a rough idea, just so you get a sense of the kind of thing you're going to do. Because we're talking to a very literate audience anyway, we don't need to do the how-to guide. But I think it's the fundamental failure of all games writing that none of us have quite got there in terms of finding a new language, finding what we want to say.
Interesting.
About our experiences that can be shared universally and understood universally, and all this sort of stuff. Because we all still do anchor ourselves to the product in some way.
Yeah.
Which is, I suppose, obviously interesting being on this podcast, because we're kind of talking about product in itself, aren't we?
Indeed. Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to. So I'm kind of saying, like, we don't want to talk about it in that way. But actually,
I want to stop you there for a second, because I think that's a really interesting point when we come to the question of product and being on this podcast, because I think doing this is already making me realize how different my definition of what product is compared to maybe perhaps other people. Because to me, in a game, the product is the experience.
Yes. Yeah.
So in some ways, the components of a game, to my mind, are more like little pieces of engineering that build up the overall effect. And I will say that it contains a little bit more than experience, and I suspect the interest that product in games should have, from my personal point of view, is also in the questions around market positioning, about how the game sits on a shelf. How does it fit into someone's game night experience, right? You have to also design a game not only for, can I make the best artistically brilliant game, but also can I make a game that fits into the typical 20-minute filler slot before someone plays a main game of an evening? And a question I've come up with Magnate recently, which is we've had to make the box bigger than it even was before, and it was already absurd, right? And I realized we had to come up with the right, make sure the box never got bigger than a Kallax shelf.
No, absolutely.
Right. So that's like, because that's a de facto design standard, which maybe people don't realize, but is, right? You can't have a game bigger than a Kallax. Otherwise, you have to find some annoying nook somewhere in your board game collection that it can't go in the right place. So to me, the experience is like 80% of what the product is.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying in terms of what there's this sense that you have of failure in the industry in general to capture the kind of really important part of the game, at the same time that maybe people are thinking of products as boxes with bits in.
Yes, I think that's right. But I think that's because, and I think that's, sorry, then to come back to actually answer your original question there, which is because you've just answered it for me, which is, it's because it's a very difficult thing to navigate, that you end up with, you end up with a couple of things. You end up with the Board Game Geek thread, which is a review thread, which is actually a description of the stuff in a box.
Yes.
How long it takes to play. It took me slightly longer to play, that sort of thing. You know, that you get that the editorial or editorializing on the feelings they had in the game are limited. You know, so you get that, and because it's very difficult to do.
Technical in nature, effectively.
Yeah,
right. It's like that. It's more. If I'm going to make an analogy here, it's closer to the technical layer of understanding filmmaking.
Yeah, exactly.
Was the lighting good? Was the shot composition? You're not talking about how did the shot composition contribute to how I felt at that moment in the film. It's just, does that meet some basic aesthetic standards?
Yes,
that
exactly.
You don't see in someone's crappy home video.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's so that's one thing that happens, and the other thing that happens, and this is something Paul Grogan's tweeted about before, which is sometimes people call his how to play videos reviews.
Interesting.
Which is just, and the thing is, functionally, actually showing people, telling people what's in the box, and then how they played it and how long it's going to take, is what sometimes functions as a review on a Board Game Geek thread, say. So that's why, you know, obviously that's why people should read magazines like mine. Because you get, well, obviously they should, but I mean, but you know, any outlet that's trying to move beyond that, because then you get to a point where we're all pushing towards a better kind of understanding of games, and then, you know, eventually we end up in sort of waffly conversations about, like, you know, play, don't we?
Right. Yes.
And then, but we won't go there today, I don't think, because it's just.
I think because that is an area where you end up sounding like a French philosopher.
Yes,
quickly,
that's a problem.
Right?
Yeah.
And I've studying some French philosophy at university, particularly around aesthetics. It does get very circular and long-winded. So that's kind of challenging. But I think it's important to keep anchoring back to this really, I think, hopefully eminently practical point that everyone can understand, which is that what we are saying here is that really experience is paramount. How someone comes away from the table feeling a certain way about a game, which is a journey that they've probably been through. There've been highs and lows. There is drama. There are these things that we actually normally associate with more narrative arts that actually can be created in a game. They're different because it's a different medium. But and then that's what we're really interested in. Really good tabletop writing is understanding those things and getting to grips with those things and being able to describe and evoke so that someone can read a review and think, oh, I can imagine how I might feel.
That's it.
And then that's what then we have this buying decision then comes on the back of, rather than just it has X components. It takes Y length of time to play, and it technically uses a worker placement mechanic.
Yes.
Right, which tends to be the limit of it. And I sure know that telling me that it's got worker placement in it, or telling me that there's auctions, or telling me that something like that is rarely telling me very much. It's like a very poor signal.
Yes.
And it's very noisy in reality in terms of me working out the games that I prefer the most. I mean, I know, for example, the things that tend to typify games are more things like collaboration or drama or the sense of stakes or these kind of things that don't belong to any technical quality.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, there are things like people do enjoy knowing that this is a social deduction game.
Yeah,
things like that. I think that's important to include in this kind of thing. But that should be, unless it's a very important part of the game, you don't need to spend too much time on that, because most people can find those definitions for themselves in some way. And if you are in deeply enamored enmeshed in the industry, then you're going to know most of these terms anyway. That's all you need. You just need the little thing to hold on to say, oh, it's a worker placement game. I don't need another one. or whatever it might be.
So that's interesting. So there is a practicality to them. I think it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess.
Absolutely.
Saying, but
Yeah.
those terms are things that somewhat limited. I think social deduction is a very interesting example that you use, because to me it strikes me that social deduction games, for example, are more alike in many ways than perhaps picking to other genres. Even I would say worker placement. There's maybe a few cards that get flipped over, and there's lots of people saying, well, I think you're the so-and-so because of this thing, and then people having a huge argument about it, right? So okay, just for the listeners here, I'm going to signpost this now. I'm not a fan of social deduction games, and they didn't work it out from what I just said, but it is, I would challenge anyone, except with maybe perhaps the one exception of something like Blood on the Clock Tower, which I've heard is genuinely phenomenal, that they do share a very such a strong familial resemblance, that it's more like the reason that works is because that's quite a high signal to noise ratio in terms of understanding what your experience is going to be. Would you agree?
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. Yeah, and but what I like to do a bit, again, I'm going to come back to that review of this War Without an Enemy. The block war game, which I described as having an element of social deduction / party game about it. Because obviously it's all about secret information. Because it's blocks, and you only see the back of the other person's block, so you don't know what troops are in what area. Which means if you're the parliamentarians, one of your goals and one of the ways to end the game, if you can, is to capture the king. So there is an element of
interesting,
of trying to find the king, and you don't know where he is, and you think he's here, and there's all sorts of stuff around, like, I think I outnumber them, but if they're all cavalry, I'm buggered. And stuff like this, and it's not quite social deduction, but it's got this sort of like weird kind of like giddiness of a party game about it, because you're trying to work out where certain things are, and the choices you're making are done with like pouring information and stuff like that. And so I like to use them sort of counterintuitively in some ways, just to say it's got the feeling of this, even if it's not got the mechanics of this, So I think turning that on its head is quite useful as well. So as long as you're talking to people who are in the right frame of mind for it.
So you're explicitly using some of that more standardized, perhaps technical language.
Yeah,
it's almost technical language, I think.
Yeah, I think
about
so.
Social deduction, and you're trying to use it in sort of newer ways to try and prize out something that has hitherto maybe been undescribed a bit about the way that those games
that makes me sound really smart. I wish that's what my intention was.
No, it sounds like it is. It sounds like exactly what it is.
This is the bit where I sound like a cartoon cowboy and say, I just call him as I see him.
Of course, yeah, of course, absolutely. Well, actually, let's bring that then to stay on this topic. So we've got this problem at the moment that we could be doing a much better job of describing experience, and I'm really interested in this one, because from my point of view, is exactly how I feel. The only difference is the angle I'm coming at is I want to build the best possible products. This is mostly defined by the overall experience that it creates, and that experience could start with seeing the box in the retail store. That could taking the shrink out. The first thing that happens when you open the box. All of those things for me are components of experience, but it's still experience that matters. I'm interested in a kind of more fiendish way from the point of engineering it, right? So I do want to learn what is objective in the sense of what is repeatable, that tends to generate a certain kind of emotional reaction in order to craft an experience, right? So that's I have that kind of interest in objectivity that's maybe very different to what people are interested in, but there's some element to that. So obviously it would be very useful for me to also have access to really good game writing, because it means that I'm able to understand better about experiences that games are creating. I could then study the game and see, oh, that's how they did that. So the question then becomes, how do we as an industry then get better? How are we going to solve this problem of increasingly writing with more maturity about experience?
I think it comes twofold. So we're a commercial magazine, really. I talk a good philosophical game, I think, about this sort of stuff. But but ultimately we are a commercial magazine. But so I find myself in a weird place with this, where so experiences you were talking about there, like unboxing the thing. Unboxing the piece. I was just thinking I've got a copy of Super Fantasy Brawl over here, and that's a game where I lifted the lid off. I went, fuck. Because inside it were not only giant pieces of plastic, but which is just always fun, right? And also, they were all contained in game trace things that stacked beautifully on top of each other.
Yeah.
And it was just like, my God, there's a lot of stuff in here. And but can I write truly about that?
Yeah.
And I think, and again, this is another sort of bridging part where we're not quite able to use the kind of language we talk about mechanics with, or we try to talk about mechanics with, for the componenty aspects of it, which would also cure us of the descriptive problems, right? So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, so like if we were somehow able to transpose that language to be able to cover that experience in a way, and I suppose really you just have to say, Chris, this is, you've got 600 words on a page. So you're not going to be able to give over so much time to how it felt when you took things out of the box. But
right, there's just a practical limit there.
There's a practical limit there.
That's one of the things
but also if
we be on the menu.
So it's going to be very hard for us to do that. But in theory, if we could apply that kind of sense of mechanical language to the way we try to talk about mechanical language, that's aspiration of that to the physical components as well. Because just to say to anyone listening to this, is saying Chris sounds like an absolute snob who just wants to play some really dry engine building thing that's just about shuffling things around and having this beautiful engine in his head that as Cole Well said to me once, I've always stuck with it, which is a good Euro game is a game that gets an engine really, really, really hot and then pulls the plug on the last turn. So he actually also mentioned this idea of taking a game you love, a Euro game you love, and playing it for one more round. So when the game ends, just if it will let you in some way, just play it for one more round, or set it up to play with a few too many blueprint cards or whatever it is. Just see what it does to you. The answer is usually it completely goes off the rails because they had to pull the plug then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there's no way. And so what I gave you there was like a nice little description of maybe how we feel when we're playing Euro games.
Yeah, no,
obviously it comes from one of the smartest people.
Maybe the idea of this engine running really hot.
Yeah,
the plug. I think that's a really great description of how those games work.
Happens to come from one of the smartest people in the industry. It's not me. It's Cole. And I think he's done that talk before, so I think he just recycled that one to me. But I think it's
you don't junk good material, right?
No, absolutely.
Just get as much bring the value out of good material.
That's what the thing is, it stays in my head. I mean, you've done this to me before, actually. We talked. We played Magnate once, and we talked about how. I can't remember if you gave it to me or we just came to it through a discussion, but how theme is a way for people to balance on if the rules aren't clear, but the theme is true to the mechanics, you can often lean on the theme to work out what the rule means.
Completely. Yes.
And I think you gave me that.
Yes, I think I remember us discussing this certainly at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was as cleanly put as that, but certainly, I mean, that's a very strong and enduring belief of mine, certainly.
Yeah. So there's these little things which I think are very good examples of our interactions with games that are they stay in my brain forever as well. That's the thing. These are just lodged in there like shrapnel.
Yeah.
And yes, to come right back around to it, if we could use that level of understanding on our components somehow, and the feelings we have of using the hard part of the product, and the experiences that we get from them. And sorry, I'm using that sort of interchangeably there of stuff and product and also experience. But then that's kind of what I'm saying is we should be able to, if we could somehow bring those all together into a review or a piece, anything, a think piece, a personal essay.
So what we're saying is, so would it be fair to characterize what you're saying is that partly then the way that we improve the writing is by allowing these things to merge? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Or the way we talk about them to merge, or to try and use the same techniques in some way. I don't know if it's truly going to work, but I think what I'm really saying is that there's a fair few magazines who go for this sort of snobbier end of things, the more theoretical side of things, and then there's a lot of then there's us who I believe we're kind of in the middle And then there's on the other side of things, which is the product review, which might on BGG, which might as well be on Amazon.
Right. Yeah.
You
Completely.
know what I mean? And like we're trying to and trying to thread that needle that encapsulates both ends of it and actually brings it to the middle. Actually,
Right. And so just understand that middle again. So there's the kind of the reviews, as you said, that are more like lists of components. We see on BGG. They could be on Amazon. And then the other end, you're talking about, I guess, the kind of really deep game writing that's sort of like essays, or you
I guess essays. I guess just and theoretical discussions of things, which is where you end up in the John Paul Sartre end of things.
Right.
Although,
yes, I see.
Although maybe he's a bad example because he's an existentialist, so maybe that's actually a really bad example.
So this is I think this is really interesting. So I don't know if you'll agree with this concrete example. One of the people that I feel in the industry who gets closest to that is Dan Thuro of Space Biff. So I love his work, and his Patreon exclusive stuff is all like the deep theoretical essay pieces about the nature of how to get historical games, or how can historical events come to life, and the problems that presents. But he also, obviously, his main stock in trade is publishing reviews that are drawing on that tradition, but obviously they're still talking about ultimately a product and giving you a sense of whether or not you would want to buy it. Would you agree with that?
So I've not read his writing, I must say, immediately. Which is the look of shock in your face, and there's probably people just throwing their podcatchers out the window. I
would just say a very simple thing I would say to that is that not enough people have. I think it's just something. I just think you'd really enjoy it. I think more than anything. Yeah.
I will hunt that down immediately. But if he's attempting to bridge that gap, then he's doing the work that we're all trying to do, which is just trying to get a bit closer to kind of, I'm going to say legitimizing the medium, but I've got bunny quotes going on through that for those at home. There's something we need to do that takes us beyond product review, and also doesn't let us run off into academic nonsense.
Right. Yes. Completely.
And that's I guess what I'm trying to get to there through my massive meandering answer there to your original quite simple question of how do we do it.
So how do you do it then? Well, I start with an introduction.
That's it. Yeah.
I write about 3 mechanics, and then I do a nice little funny end, and we publish it. Which could have been the answer, I guess, to that one. To be honest, I get the sense that most of the audience would be much more interested in the by its nature meandering answer to some extent, in the sense that in the best possible way, that's a really tough, nuanced subject that is really hard to unpick. So I kind of knew that the answer would naturally go in that direction, because that's how it is. So I would love to talk more about that another time, because I think this is an incredibly rich theme that we could get into more on. But before we do, I'm wondering, you mentioned, like, we've got to remember this, there's the cold commercial reality of the fact that we have 600 words to play with. You can't write one of your Jean Paul Sartre-esque essays about the nature of play every time you want to talk about the latest spin on Uno. So as a result, you've got these other kind of commercial pressures. And I think what would be really interesting, and I think is really critical to talk about in this podcast, is that positioning of the magazine in general, and how it sits in its marketplace. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about, if we just kind of place it about, we've talked a bit about what it's not about doing essays, but firstly, I guess I want to understand, how does it sit next to other reviewers from a more markets perspective? And what unique thing do you do for your readers that no one else does, and how does it justify the place of the magazine in the marketplace?
We are a analog reading medium for a analog hobby. We are on the thing that your hobby is made out of. It's made out of paper. Your boards are made out of cardboard. For the most part. And I think there is a very, and I hate to bring it up, but the whole lockdown thing, everyone feels very atomized, very desperately stretched thin in some sort of psychic societal way, you know,
Completely.
and and I think that just having a print magazine that isn't that that isn't the magazine isn't SEO to hell. When you read an article online and you're like, okay, that heading didn't need to be there. That's all the keywords.
Oh God, yes.
And you're like, I don't know how much I really trust this as much, in the way I would trust something that had just been written for the sake of me buying a product. Also, you can trust that we're not writing for other people. That's the other thing. Because you are buying the magazine. The magazine is the product that you're buying, and so you can trust that we are editorially independent, which we are. I actually don't see what I don't see what adverts are going in.
Right. Okay.
Until a couple of days before we go to print, because it's none of my business.
Yeah.
We have a certain number of I know there's a certain number of ad pages that I need to make an account for, make available, which support us more generally. But it's a general support. It's not. We don't do advertorial. We don't do anything like that. Yeah, we don't do. We don't even at the moment. Although I don't think it'd be too bad to do something like a sponsored painting guide or something like that. Which we do have. We have a painting guide in the magazine.
So you have this deliberate, I think the technical term is Chinese wall between the two sides.
Possibly, yes. I'm not sure which side of it I'm on. I guess the Mongolians.
I think it's
is that not the Great Wall
side, rather than the Yuan dynasty side or something. No, I think actually, to be fair, the Yuan dynasty were actually the Mongolians, so that's not going to help. What I know is that the important term that I wanted to
is that scathing satire? I'm not sure.
I think it's a term from no, it's just me showcasing historical knowledge. I think realistically, the question, and then thinking it was terribly important to correct myself. There you go. The Chinese wall is a concept which I first came across in banking and financial sector, which is where there are certain parts of banks which are not supposed to communicate with other parts. So I think they go quite far there. They have things like if you try to place an internal telephone call between two different departments, it will block the telephone call. So there are things like that level. I'm assuming you don't really need to have that level at the magazine, but you do have this kind of Chinese wall where you are purely focused. You don't know what the adverts are going to be. You know there are going to be some ad slots for page layouts, but you don't otherwise. That's what you know.
I don't know what's going to go on those pages, and sometimes I look at it, and this is, I guess this is a moan about the industry in some ways, which is I want to hear about all of your games, not just the ones that you I can arrange an interview for. I've occasionally seen an advert and gone, oh, that looks good. Why didn't they ring me? why did they book it? Why did they book an ad straight away? Which is lovely. It's great because it supports the mag, and ads look good. You can put whatever you like on it. But it's just occasionally we have it's just a funny thing. We go, oh, that's interesting. And I do work with the sales team, obviously. They know what I'm putting in the magazine because obviously I have to know ahead, and stuff like that, so they can I guess sell against it and stuff like that. But it's not my business.
So we have this. So you have this Chinese wall, and this is a big part of what the magazine does is trust.
Yeah,
right. Because you can trust it. You're actually paying for it in a very straightforward way.
Yeah.
You pay a cover price. You get an opinion about something.
Yeah.
And that you can rely on. There's something in that you're saying as well, where there's almost an association with the analog nature of the medium itself. It sort of suits an analog publication. And is that just because there's a kind of nice aesthetic meeting of those two, or is it more something practical about the fact that the kind of people that like board games are also the kind of people that like handling physical things?
I think there's an element of that latter part, certainly. Right. I think and I think this is where I was going with the we're locked to screens, and we have been for a year and a half or whatever. And just the idea that you wouldn't have to look at something on a screen,
right?
Is good. And this is me just doing the prelude to what the real place of the magazine is in everyone's hearts. And the truth is, in reality, in everyone's smallest room, which is we are the premier Lou Reed I mean, there is longer articles for certain things, and there's shorter articles for other things. And if you just want to pick at a piece of it, we're there in a way that is entirely on your terms because of the physical medium. There's no, and I'm not just talking about reading on the toilet. You can read anywhere; it's fine. But there's none of the. I've got 5 minutes. I'll just check Twitter. I suffer 5 psychic damage.
Exactly. Suffer 5 psychic damage. Take 2 horror, whatever you want to call it. Like completely. It's a huge advantage over that.
Like that. So in that way, we are with that. So that's where I think our place really is that we are. Because we're hopefully a good read, hopefully we're interesting, and we are also we're also your friends, in the sense of that if you read Owen Duffy or Dan Jolin or Anna Blackwell or whoever in any of our writers in the magazine, you've read them for a few months now. And you've got to know them a little bit.
That's important. Yeah.
And you maybe read a feature on that they put together, or you read their Cardboard Manifesto, which is like our opinion piece column, which is just a short blast of 600 words of usually the smallest hill that people are willing to die on.
Yes, of course.
Which is good. That's the sort of the right amount of levity for what we're going for. And they're always really interesting because people think way different to the way you think they think. So you read these people and you know them, and you maybe interact with them on Twitter as well, and that sort of thing. And that means when they come to recommend you something, you go, well, of course Dan's going to like that. It's about Alien.
Okay.
Because that's his favorite film. I think his favorite film is actually The Fly. I can't quite remember. But you get to know these people, and that means that you're kind of in communication with them in a way that you don't necessarily get on the product end of things. You do get it in other magazines, obviously, in other online platforms that do proper editorial. But in terms of the product reviews from a random BGG user, you probably do know them in some ways, but they're not going to be able to play everything for you with the consistency that we can.
So very, very unlikely they'd be able to do that. And so you're building up this sense of their taste, effectively. And
that's part of it,
and who they are, and this can inform when you're reading the review. This is informing you more about the game, because actually it isn't just a question of what they're writing, it's about what they're writing and what you know about them.
That is it, exactly. So that's a big part of it anyway, and as I say, that's not entirely unique, but we are in this this position where no one's getting paid for a review. Well, I mean, they are getting paid to write it. Obviously, they're getting paid for their words, but no one's, there's no sponsored reviews or anything like that. We don't do anything weird like that. No. So you are getting absolute honesty. And sometimes you see magazines in the same section as in the board gamey sort of gaming section, and you see magazines which are just advertorial. And you see this on Kickstarter as well. You see magazines being put together, but people pay 500 quid to write 5 pages. And that's advertorial, and people back it and buy it, and it's weird.
So it's interesting you said that. I was involved in a conversation on Twitter just last night, actually, with some reviewers discussing this, including Matt Throw. I don't know if he's someone that read some Matt stuff. So and I've got to say, from my personal publisher experience, I've got to be careful how much I say here. But I am very, very unconvinced that a lot of the paid for stuff even drives much value. So let's say I am a ruthless game marketer and I want to get as many backers as possible. Based on my ruthless measurement, I'm not convinced that a lot of those paid stuff even works. When I looked at who was coming to back the Kickstarter, for Magnate, for example, the top earned media reviewers not only beat all of the preview stuff, but they beat all of the advertising 5 times over.
Yeah, people want real reviews.
Right. So I've questioned a lot of this. I find this entire aspect of the industry kind of interesting, I used a previewer in the process of doing Magnate because it was partly an insurance policy. Very fortunately, it turned out that lots and lots of people wanted to review it and do genuine coverage of it, and were really interested in just for its sake. And I don't want to denigrate any of the previewers here, and says they did a pretty solid job. One of them that I did, I wasn't hugely impressed by it. I'm not going to say who it is, but in general, that paid content just didn't do very much. So I find this quite interesting why there's so much of it, because I'm just like, looks like it would just fail.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is like people should take out an advert if they want to advertise.
Yeah,
yeah. I will say, however, we one thing we do that is paid that involves the editorial team is we do preview videos now, because we have access to the studio and that sort of stuff. So, but that's kind of still separated because we're not reviewing it. We're just giving overviews and stuff like that. And also, it's usually for Kickstarters, so we're not even going to talk about it for a year.
Yeah,
most of the time on any kind of editorial like review level where you're getting a real verdict or anything.
Yeah.
And also, we only work with people we like as well. So
of course,
we
yeah.
just say like not to completely say that we're entirely pure and unmuddied by money in some way, but just to get that in there. But and they're very successful as well. I'm sorry to say they're very successful in terms of the reach they get. And so in that sense, they're successful. In terms of, as you say, the hard end where you are, where it's like, do people back it from paid media? I don't know. it's where I have to land.
It's one of these ones where I aspire to be something to being as transparent as I feel I can be on those things with people, because I do feel like it would change the conversation a little bit. My sense of it is, and I'm going to be maybe take a bit of a risk here, is that some of the previewers, and again, I can't speak to what Tabletop Game Magazine does, but if I took some of the previewers in the wider market, the video ones, it seems like the business is more about, there are people who can't get reviews by really good reviewers simply because you have a very small number of games you can review. Even when you apply those filters we talked about earlier for Tabletop Game Magazine, it's still, you've got to look for the things that are hits, what looks really promising. People have got their lovely little darling project Kickstarter. It probably hasn't been very, very optimized towards thinking about what the market really needs and what will land really well. They feel they need some reviews, because if there's no reviews on the Kickstarter page, then they're not raising any money. So as a result, they pay for previewers. And the problem is that because it's a paid preview, and people get a sense quite quickly of who the paid previewers are and who the reviewers who are not taking money is. Very quickly, it might drive a lot of views, but maybe doesn't drive a lot of conversions. Again, I don't have any broad numbers for that. I only have my own numbers for that. But I don't know. It for me anyway, it questions the value of some of that, and I do feel like it might be a bit of a bubble actually, that some of the paid previewers will move on, and some will continue to be great content, because if it comes from a name that they trust and it's just good reach, it may do well. But
I think it's I mean, I always think that videos done for Kickstarters like that, like the ones we do, so and our most recent one was for the Everdell expansions, which look great, and we're just giving an overview of what they are, and then we covered every expansion up until then, which you'll get in the complete collection, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, it's like, if you want a potted history of Everdell, we've actually given you that as the publisher, the Tabletop Tycoon or Starling Games, because they're sort of two hats there,
right? Okay.
They have got a potted history of Everdell that they can basically chop up and use as they wish for the rest of time. Get something that's going to last you for the second and third reprint if it goes well. You want the setup guide and how to play, and here's the expansions and all that sort of stuff. You want to be able to wheel that video out for 10 years. That's how I think about it anyway.
So that makes a lot of sense. So something I think it's really important for me to say at this point as well about the previewers, because like I said, I work with a few for Magnate, is that all the ones that worked really well were almost exactly that. So I had a absolutely brilliant experience working with Monique of Girls Game Shelf, which sadly no longer runs as a site, but obviously individually the creators have gone off to do different things. And she did the most incredible rules video on Magnate, and I am eternally grateful. it was absolutely brilliant, very compact, very strong, and that was an example to me of actually, I think what you're saying, to be really fair, really good content, because it wasn't, here's my opinion that I've paid for, right? And actually, I wasn't comfortable with working with anyone who was taking that stance. It was more like, here's a useful description that could be useful for different people. So I had someone, for example, I worked with in German as well. It was brilliant to see something in another language, which is difficult to get when you're coming from the Anglosphere. And again, it's just a description of like, this is what the game is. This is how. It's a way of more like, it was a description to help people understand what it was. And then the same thing with another American reviewer as well, or previewer. And actually, yeah, and actually, as you said, there's some really more interesting creative processes potentially work here as well. When we talk about the Everdell example, that is something that then continues to be a useful asset, which is just a very interesting, more creative take on the whole thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think this Kickstarter often gets a kicking for a lot of what people, again, bunny quotes, problems we have in the industry. What a lot of people call problems we have in the industry anyway. And I don't think it's really true in most cases, but there is a kind of pump and dump mechanic in there of, there's a single point where everything works, everything goes into it, and then you do hear from creators after that point, but everything that happens after that is you're only talking to select group of people who've already backed it. You're no longer talking to the world. So then in terms of adding to like a greater conversation about gaming, or any sort of philosophical point that you want to make around that kind of thing, you've already closed yourself off to a group of people who are only interested in the product or the stuff.
Makes sense.
And so, as you say, getting something that lasts a bit longer and does contribute beyond that, it's something that's going to be useful for when it does come to retail, actually, even though you didn't intend it to come to retail when you kickstarted it.
I mean, I want just to shout out to Monique again. That rules video was phenomenal, and it is one of those things where that actually will be, even though it's for the prototype version, it will still be doing a really good job for people to help them learn the game. If they choose not to use the package tutorial, which I suspect they probably will, because but if they choose that, it kind of ultimately makes sense. I mean, I looked at doing a rules video for Magnate, a kind of retail rules video, and actually came to the conclusion that in some ways it undermined the value that I place in the tutorial by making it look like I'm hedging my bets. Whereas that tutorial I'm really bloody proud of. And actually I think it will do an excellent job. So but for some people, there will be people whose learning style will instead be the rules video, and having Monique's video there already will be huge, I think, for that. So I'm really glad about it. So you're right, there are pieces of this puzzle, and I think it is a bit simple just to talk about saying, oh, it's all bad, there's all problems here, when actually it's a more subtle picture.
Yes, exactly.
But it's an interesting one. I'm glad we've been able to actually discuss this one up front, because I feel like it's sometimes a discussion that's had in maybe overly hushed tones.
Yes.
Perhaps. And it's good to be able to explore the nuance of the question a little bit as to what works, what doesn't work. And certain things have asset value, as just brilliant little creations that go way beyond necessarily an initial, we're paying for this for conversions, which is, I think, not the way necessarily to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, so just to echo that kind of sentiment, and so I have and one of the reasons I'm quite happy to talk about this stuff openly and possibly in slightly rude terms, I suppose, depending on who's listening, is that I have a sordid past in marketing. I did copywriting, and I ran teams of copywriters, did SEO, marketing, that sort of stuff, PPC, all that sort of online digital stuff, right? And one of the sicknesses that marketers get is they destroy the product by looking at too many graphs. They destroy the thing they're meant to be holding central to everything they do, and that is something that is a general function of our datafied society or whatever, I guess. And I'm going to sound like someone who's claiming they've been shadow banned on Facebook or something, but like everyone just cares about the likes or someone, that sort of thing. But it does a weird thing to your head, doesn't it? To say that something is better than something else because a number says so, and it's a distancing tool that is used by marketers, because the measurement is also a distancing tool, because having the measurement, while good sometimes for measuring something and saying this line goes up and that's good, it also obfuscates whether the thing that's being sold is good or bad or what people want, or anything like that. And that's a question. And that's a question that people should like always be asking themselves when they're marketing something. Is like, not just I need more clicks. It should be, is this product still good? Is it still what's right, or do we need to change the product? Do we need to do something differently? And there's obviously all sorts of things you can do around, are we talking to the right people and stuff like that? But in general, just keeping in mind that you have something of worth that is central, that has nothing to do with lines going up and down, is like a really important thing for marketers. Because if you lose sight of that and you forget about the product, you just look at the numbers, you end up kind of in a weird, like a postmodern sort of like void.
Completely.
And I think that can happen. I've not run a Kickstarter myself, although I'd love to. I think I should maybe do one just for the learning process. Maybe
it's a great thing to do. I think it would learn a lot from it.
Yeah, I'd love. I think maybe I'll do something, but maybe that's not the spirit to go into a Kickstarter with. Anyway, but I assume the feedback you get in numbers from that, and all the analytical tools you have tied in with it, make you try and it pushes you towards trying to make decisions off those numbers. And I think that's actually very far away from the sort of generative heart of Kickstarter and crowdfunding generally, which is, I've got a cool thing. Are there enough people in different places? I'm not standing outside my house waving it around saying, do you want to buy it? I'm saying, everyone on the internet, would you all like to buy one copy of this? You happen to be all over the world. You've all got the same interest. And that's why we can make it happen, because you can all pay for my manufacturing up front. And that's the heart of it. And that gets, again, that's something that gets lost by maybe those numbers, but that's a speculation.
I think it's a reasonable speculation. It's a really interesting one, because in terms of good product management, you have to stay on top of your metrics, because you need something that's a sense check all the time to what you're doing. But the problem becomes of the classic maxim that the moment whatever you choose to measure will be what you optimize towards.
That's it.
And so if you begin reducing your perspective to 2 or 3 metrics, that could get you to do terrible, terrible things. I think that we really forget about this. I mean, this has been the whole issue. People have seen the things like the Netflix documentary, like The Social Dilemma, know a bit about the practice of Silicon Valley, know that this has been a huge problem in terms of the way in which it's like, well, any amount of increasing engagement is good, because increasing engagement means more eyeballs, means more time on page, means more advertising money. And unfortunately, it turns out that the things that people engage with the most, because we're wired evolutionary to do with this, are negative things. So it's like, therefore, correct for the AI to pour more and more negative nonsense into people's feeds. And that's a really good recent real world example of that kind of optimization strategy. And I can see the same thing happens to Kickstarter. And it's a pity, because it's completely logical that companies end up using it as a pure pre-order platform. The product's already been made, it's sitting in a warehouse, and really it's just a marketing event. It's logical. You would do that because the numbers have said so, and it's like you can use the tool that way. But it does mean that we end up in this world where it does get further and further away from its kind of original purpose. But I understand the pull of it. It's such a powerful marketing event. There are so many consumers on it. To sort of say, oh no, I will be terribly virtuous and not use that further down the line, that's a difficult decision to take. So yeah, it's a tough one.
I think so. I spoke to Laura at Game on Tabletop a little while ago, and she mentioned that they run a crowdfunding platform. It's all sort of integrated a nice, interesting way. There's no separate backer kit thing that you have to go to afterwards. Jump through several hoops to actually get to that stuff. So that's kind of their selling point. But her feeling is that for everyone now, it's just another sales channel. And it's not even seen as like necessarily a crowdfunding channel in the way you're talking about there. So you talk about big companies, like I think Come On's maybe the best example of this, where maybe it's not even a sales channel, maybe it's an advertising channel. Because you want a number that says backed in 35 seconds, 1.5 million.
Yes.
Whatever it is. Because they're great numbers to stick on things, aren't they?
Great. A million of this seconds in seconds. Great.
In seconds, but yeah. So her idea was that actually even companies like Come On probably do rely on that part of the ecosystem, as well. Not necessarily in the upfront funding, but in the sense of to sell the game at all.
Yes, I think there are a whole lot of different products that are genuinely challenging to do in a retail environment. I think we can never underestimate the power of Kickstarter's sweet margin. Anyone who has done any business with distributors or retailers knows that the amount of money you're making per unit on each thing you directly sell in Kickstarter is much higher than you can in retail and distribution. So there are lots of products. I mean, this is what the team behind Seventh Continent have said, that they simply couldn't bring it to retail because it would be too expensive to do. As it happens, I actually believe that about that product, but that's another story. That is an example, however, of the kind of problem that people are up against. So it makes sense from that point of view. If you've got something very big and complicated, then with a more niche audience, probably is a better place to have it, rather than assuming that you can selling it through retail could actually be a mistake.
Yeah, that's it.
Something that which we need to talk about today, and my listeners would not forgive me if we didn't talk about more explicitly on the nose, I think, is around this analog versus digital question.
Oh yeah.
Of the idea, you're an analog magazine in digital space, and in fact, we had someone sent a question in about this, and I was going to cover it anyway because it's such a critical one. But the first thing I want to say is, well, let's not forget here, the magazine was founded in 2015. Is that correct?
Around then, yeah. I think it's 2015, yeah.
So what's interesting about this story is that we're not talking about a magazine which was launched in the 1980s and has somehow had to keep up with the times. We're talking about a magazine dropped into a world of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So we're looking at a slightly different story here, right? In terms of we're not looking at magazine's trying to keep up, but actually more like magazine does something unique in the space.
Absolutely, yeah. So the story of the magazine is really that a gentleman called Bob, who was working at Warner's Publications Group, which is where I work now. Obviously, shout out to my employers. They put together a single issue of the magazine, issue number 1. Warner's deals in niche subjects, so obviously it makes sense that board games in 2015 would still be considered by the W.H. Smith's market as a niche subject for the most part. And they took a stand at UK Games Expo and they sold out immediately, and everyone said, when's the next issue? And they said, oh well, it's meant to be annual actually. And they were told that it needs to happen faster than that. And so they went twice a year, and then they went bi-monthly, and eventually this is then Bob left at some point. Matt took over, who's now at Dicebreaker, and they went monthly, and then Matt left, and I'm here churning a monthly magazine about board games. Which, if you think about that acceleration, that was all driven directly by consumer demand. So no one went in saying there needs to be a monthly magazine about board games. It just got to a point where people were asking for it directly from us.
Right. Yeah.
And so, what's its place in the world now? Well, it does all those things that I think I kind of covered a little bit earlier
Yeah, we
about
covered that already.
being on paper, you know.
And what does that mean in terms of subscribers? Because that's a question that if I can
Oh,
ask that
go on.
question, is exactly, you mentioned that we've talked already a little bit about what it does a little bit uniquely, I think, in the space, but is around is that showing in subscriber counts? Is that still on a growth curve, that your subscribers are growing very strongly? Has it reached a kind of stable equilibrium?
Yeah, we're very. I mean, our subscribe numbers are very stable. You know, we get a lot of single issue buyers as well,
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
or people who buy. What usually happens is things like people buy a one-off issue because of one article, and then eventually they'll get a quarter subscription, and then they'll decide actually they should just get it all the time.
Right. Okay.
It generally seems to be the pattern for it. So yeah, so the numbers are fairly good. I mean, we recently had some Digimon cards on the front cover, and that tends to sell things a little bit quicker. So issue 52 completely sold out a couple of days after being on sale.
And what's the kind of, can you tell me, do you have circulation numbers you can share?
I think we print like 20,000 or something like that when you add it all together. So fairly chunky market there. And I think the thing, and to come back to your actual question, which is we're not just a magazine in a digital world. We also have a website where we try and put as much news as we possibly can on before everyone else does. We do occasionally get a little scoop, which is quite nice. All our reviews go on there now as well.
Right.
So you can get our reviews online as well if you refuse to buy a magazine. There are we've got our YouTube channel where we're slowly climbing towards more video content, often reworking sort of classics that we like in a format where one of us teaches the other one the game, and then we talk about why we like it. And so you get it's a bit of an actual play, a bit of a how-to, and a bit of a sort of more general. We have a feature in the magazine called "Have You Played," which is kind of just like it kind of is that. It's like, have you played this game? It's really good. It's just like a pure-hearted recommendation of maybe a game you just forgot existed or went out of print really quickly or something like that. You know, always very timely for some reason. So, or it's getting into second edition. Do you know what I mean? That sort of thing. And so with kind of answering that question, like, have you played this, and doing that sort of thing. Then we have a podcast as well. And so the answer is that the magazine is just the beating heart of everything. And really, so even if you pick up the digital edition of the magazine, which is comes through a subscription service called Pocket Mags, you in that Pocket Mags version, you'll get things like, we'll have little audio interviews where we embed a little bit of basically stuff we couldn't fit in maybe, or just if there's just a funny bit, sometimes we add that in, that sort of thing. So we're doing all these little bits of digitizing our content across the whole spectrum. And then of course we have the massively successful TikTok channel as well, where Charlie does who's our online editor, who does most of the news writing. She does some very good features in the magazine itself as well, and reviews, where she does very silly things for other people's amusement. She's very good.
So my question then would be, where do you see it in the future? So is it the case that you think for a long time that the print magazine is still going to be the beating heart? And the reason I ask this is because I also come from a bit of a magazine publishing background. I ran a newspaper in Croydon, a local news magazine, for 6 years, and we produced about 48 print editions of that. And I think we took the gamble that there would always be some demand for it. And I think there was. We got to about 15,000 circulation, but that actually the advertising model ended up didn't work for us. Local ads, I'm just convinced that maybe they are just dead, pretty much. Certainly for us, it didn't work out in the end. But there seemed to be some demand for it. Do you see that going forward, or is actually the whole shape of the company going to change over time in terms of which parts of that mix are more important?
So okay, full reveal. I take off my editor's mask, peeling back my
Ta-da!
and actually my title is head of content for gaming. So that's across 2 magazines. So that's Miniature War Games as well, which is a fabulous magazine that occasionally has plastic soldiers in the front, as well as really, really interesting articles about a lot of historical wargaming and a lot of other stuff.
Right,
So,
and
we're covering both of these. I cover both these factions, and then also is my job to make us more online in some ways. I don't just mean psychologically as I am now, which is extremely online. It's more like getting us to a point where the magazine, while it remains the engine or the heart of everything, you can you'd be able to draw a perfect map of it back from some form of media that relates to it. So the ultimate answer is that as far as I'm concerned, the magazine will always be there, because you talk about the advertising model there, and I think in addition to the actual advertising model that the newspaper suffered with, then you probably also suffered with the concept of distrust in local news as well. I think local news took a really big hit over the last 10 years at least. I think local news really got eaten by the internet in a way that the major newspapers didn't. I think.
Completely agree. Yeah.
So I think that's slightly different to compare to a niche magazine, for example. And I'm not a salesman, but if I was going to sell you the concept of why you taking the advert out in the magazine, it's because you're talking to someone who's already paid for the privilege of seeing what's in that magazine.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
And the number of you can say, if I do an advert on your website, that will or anyone's website, in fact, or Board Game Geek or anything like that, that will technically be seen, again, running quotes, by this many people. Yes, but their intention is nothing to do with your affinity with that website. People's, it's not given the same traction. It does remain effective, I will say. I think online advertising does remain effective in some ways, but I think in terms of the magazine itself, just having this literally bought-in audience does make it a viable long-term platform, and it's proven to be so far. Even through COVID, we still put out 100 pages of the magazine every month. Even when games were bobbing on outside China in big container ships.
Right. Yeah.
We still did it because not only because it's a lifeline to people, it's an important thing to do. It was important not to shut down.
Yeah,
it was very important because we are, as I say, we were a lifeline to some people, just a way for people to still enjoy their hobby. Also, just like the gaming world still existed, and we didn't want to ignore it. Even
completely.
They were, some of them were quite strange issues, I will say. We did a couple of like retro reviews and stuff like that, which was actually a really nice chance to talk about some older games
and review something again. So you think then, in terms of where you see the future of this, is that it could just be that it might gradually transform into different mediums as they arrive, but it continues. The magazine continues looking like really print magazine at the beating heart, with actually this sort of satellite of different things around that are taking on more or greater importance as time goes by.
Absolutely, yeah. So you could, there will be a point where there's more people watching our YouTube channel than are subscribed to the magazine.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that's perfectly fine, because but the thing is, they're not equivalent. And
it's really interesting. Yeah.
And the way we put out 100 pages of the magazine every month means that the amount of content we're creating is pretty huge, considering the size of our team.
Yeah.
The editorial team in-house is only 2 people. And then obviously all of our lovely freelancers. It's just a way of us finding where our place is in that world.
Yeah.
beyond the magazine, and hopefully it's in the nice contemplative world of talking about games like this for a little bit.
Completely.
And more Twitch streams and stuff like that, because I really like doing those Twitch streams.
Right, yeah.
But you can't always find the time. But yeah, it's just trying to do a few. At the moment, we're trying to do a few things well, which is more video and more podcasts.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Well, I mean, that's something, another time I'd love to talk about in more detail.
Yes,
because I think
endlessly.
that question about the future of media is one that is close to my heart, and I think is really interesting to spend some more time on. So before we wrap up, I have got one question that I think hopefully lots of our more publishing audience will be interested in, which is this. I'd like to know what your top 3 tips are for a publisher looking to get the attention of the media for their game. What should they be doing to do that?
And you mean a publisher of board games?
Yes, publisher of board games.
Publisher of board games.
Or tabletop miniatures games, war games, anything in that kind of broad category.
The best thing to do, because the people you're going to be talking to are probably people like me. If you just want coverage, you just want someone to see it, the best thing to do is send a physical copy of whatever it is to that person. Talk to them. There is, I feel, a lot of shy people in this industry.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I read every email, even if I don't get a chance to get back to you. I read every email. I'm like Santa like that. So and just not the working at home gut as well. So it's I think this industry, like any industry, when you're talking to the media, is a contact sport. So stay in contact. That's ultimately the thing. And then just being really useful with things like, here's a load of really useful high quality assets that you can actually print. I think being upfront, vaguely organized, that's not that. I don't work with anyone who's not organized, to be honest. So I've never really encountered that problem. But there's levels of, hey, here's our Dropbox. We upload all our new assets into it for media as we go. Add it to your Dropbox. That's like, oh, well, you're my favorite, because it means that I don't have to have 5 emails with you talking to you about DPI.
I was going to say, just say this right now. We're talking 300 DPI.
300 DPI for print.
300 DPI, high quality product imagery. Let's call that out for specifically what it should be.
72 for screens. Absolutely fine. You can put pretty much anything on a screen.
Yeah,
it will do.
Multiple versions in the same folder. I mean, we might as well get to this detail, right? Because there'll be some people who'll be interested in hearing about this, and hopefully it could shortcut your job in the future as well. So,
if anyone works with Ross Connell of More Games Please, I believe you did for Magnate.
Yes, he did phenomenal product imagery for Magnate. They are absolutely incredible, those photos. I think they're great.
I mean, aside from just hire Ross, the advice is to do what he does, which is you get your nice cutout product shots, which you can use absolutely everywhere, including with the reviews in our magazine. But then also when you're doing an interview with us, we might want some sexy ones as well. So Ross will do some sweeping half fade in, half fade out. What's it called? Tilt focus, is that right?
Yeah,
something like that. He'll do some very clever things like that. And have those in a separate folder called artistic shots or something like that, which I do see quite a lot now, which I really like. Just the option of me being able to go through, okay, because as to say again, for us, we're a commercial magazine. We need to, as much as I say, we don't necessarily need to always talk about what's in the box. We do have a section with every review which tells you what's in the box, because it's an important piece of thing.
Yes,
people want to see when I say there's some massive minis in this. You do just want to see like your regulation size wooden cubes next to a massive mini, even if it's in the generalized product shot.
That's really that's the thing. Yeah, completely.
So that's in terms of once you've got through, let's say. But most people in the industry, if they're like me, are driven entirely by novelty. So tell me what your game is. I want to have a look anyway. If you can spare the review copies, absolutely send them. And that's almost all it needs to be. If you're a publisher and you have available designers who might want to talk, let me know. Because there's some publishers will come to me and say, hey, I've got the brands they'd like to have a chat about the new Exit puzzle game, and that's cool, and that's really good and really useful because it gets me straight to the meat of it, which is we can just talk straight away. Whereas other times I'm chasing through a couple of channels because actually the game was because the designer is actually in Eastern Europe or they're in America or something like that. So actually the people I'm talking to about this distribution of this game, which is the one I can cover because it's available in the UK, the people I'm talking to there are actually just the distributor, the second or third publisher of the game, and actually they have to bounce back through a couple of people to get there. Saying all that, of course, this is one of the most open industries in the world as well. So, and I feel like the difference between talking to Rainer Knizia or Eric Lang or yourself or Andre at Games Omnivorous, talking to any of these people, there is literally no difference between that at all because everyone's just very nice. And everyone's just like, excellent, another excuse to talk about games.
Exactly. Too damn right. Fantastic. And that's very useful. I think that should be great advice, I think, for anyone who's interested in getting a kind of coverage. So then, to wrap up, so anything we should be on the lookout for from Tabletop Gaming Magazine sometime soon, bearing in mind I know you don't know exactly when this episode is going.
So when does this episode come out? So I will just dive in regardless. At the end of March, if this episode has not come out yet, we are doing a spring showcase, which is a bit like our virtual show of last year, which we did. And so which you were part of last year.
Yes, indeed.
You did a panel on building games with Bez and Gil, and we are doing a spring showcase, and it's all just announcements, people chatting, showing off the new games, and sort of play testing, but not necessarily. So if you've got a tabletop simulator version of your game available anywhere or on other simulated platforms, we're going to make space for you to just say, hey, here it is over that weekend. We've got announcements from people like Free League. We've got a really interesting, and this is a bit niche, GameGenic, who make card sleeves and stuff like that. You might actually really like this in terms of the product end of things. They make some really nice boxes, and they've got some they showed off some like totally new stuff that no one's seen yet. So that might be actually an interesting niche for you personally in terms of because they are basically magic boxes as far as I can tell. And then we've got playthroughs of games like Necromolds, played a bit of Frosthaven with Isaac. So we really reveal a few monsters there, and then you watch me be sort of like vaguely alpha gamed by him, because obviously he made the game. He knows what's the best thing to do is.
And I'd hope he'd be pretty good at it. That's it.
It's you what he's pretty good at Frosthaven. So that's all going on the 27th and 28th of March, so the Saturday and Sunday there. And it's all pre-recorded. You can just turn up. We'll be tweeting about stuff that's going live throughout the day. But you don't have, anyone who's involved doesn't actually have to work on that weekend unless they really want to. The only people that will be working that weekend will be us. And that means that there'll be a nice sense of buzz. We've got so many people turning up to the website to enjoy this virtual show last time. So that's the next exciting thing to come from us. And then there's loads of other video stuff coming from us as well. We've got just more sort of explorations of games that we like and things like that. So come join us on YouTube there, Tabletop Gaming Mag, on that one.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And if people want to follow you, I guess they can find the magazine quite easily on Twitter, Tabletop Gaming Magazine. Whack that into Google, the links are going to come up.
Yes.
But if they want to kind of follow you personally, or what you're tweeting at, do you have a personal Twitter account which you tend to use?
Yes, you're more than welcome to follow me and my retweets of bits of poetry I like. And strange articles and things like that. So my other sorted past is I used to run a literary newsletter, which I was recently skewered by an interview I did with Ben Maddox of 5 Days for Doomsday. 5 games for Doomsday. Sorry. That must have had a massive reach in the tens. And And he wasn't wrong. So that's at CJ Eggett, so that's CJEGGETT. If you wanted to follow me on Twitter there, I like seeing that number go up, despite everything I said before. I'd like seeing the data points.
That's why it works. We love those graphs with the steepening curve. That's what we like.
Yeah, that's it.
And on that note, thank you so much again for joining me. This has been a real pleasure. This has been absolutely brilliant. And I hope you will come back again, because there were so many things on my list that we left off in terms of discussion. Yeah, and please come back again.
Absolutely anytime, as you know. And thank you for having me. I don't get to say that very much. So I was about to say thank you for joining me, but that's not right. That's yours. That's your line.
Producing Fun is produced by Naylor Games. If you enjoyed the show, follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, or other major podcasting platforms. Remember, Producing Fun is also a product, and it thrives on feedback. So please leave a review wherever possible, or simply send me your feedback directly. You can message me on Twitter at NaylorJames, or write me an email, james@naylorgames.com. Until next time.